Please welcome back to the stage Raluca Ada Popa and our panelists, Ron Perez from Intel, Nelly Porter from Google Cloud Platform, and Vishal Gossain from Ernst & Young.
All right, so we are here right now to discuss about a very important topic, use cases and applications in confidential computing. Now, the panel moderator was scheduled to be Andrew Brust. However, because of the recent flight madness, he couldn't quite arrive from New York. 4th of July is coming close, so I'll be instead moderating. And just very briefly, since I talked this morning and you guys know me, I'm a professor at UC Berkeley, working in security and privacy, focusing on confidential computing, and also co-founder of OPIC. So maybe we'll start by having an introduction from each one of you. Your name, your role as it pertains to confidential computing.
Sure. So I'm Ron Perez. I'm an Intel fellow. I lead a group of pretty senior technologists right at Intel that focus on various security technologies, but focusing on confidential computing especially, right? I also am the so-called chief security architect at Intel. So we have a number of technology domains that span, obviously, all of our products, right? And for those, usually like to have a chief technologist, right, responsible for those. And so that's what I'm responsible for as well.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Ron. I'm Nelly Porter. I'm product manager, lead product manager with GCP, Google Cloud. My responsibility and again, my accountability to Google and GCP is around encryption. Encryption, all kind of encryption in transit, encryption at rest, and encryption in use, confidential computing. Also, I own this very interesting and very challenging area in GCP called secure software supply chain, because as you can imagine, not only we can create a lot of encryption, but we also want to ensure that software that we run is actually trustworthy. It's about me.
Thank you. My name is Vishal. I'm a partner out of EY Toronto office, EY Canada. I lead the risk analytics practice there, where we focus on almost everything as it relates to risk, whether it's regulatory models, whether it's business strategies, etc., including AI and ESG. And with respect to confidential computing, the intent is kind of EY is taking a leading stance on how do we use confidential computing for risk and non-risk use cases, so helping EY with that.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining me on the panel. So I guess the very first question is, when you talk to potential users, how do you describe to them what confidential computing is and how it compares to the other available technologies and why they should use it instead?
Now, that's a good question. And I think I've seen, a number of us have been in this space for a while now, right? And the conversation changes. You might think of it in terms of maybe time epochs, right? Early on, it was the academic researchers, the industrial researchers, looking at confidential computing to really solve problems that were not practical to solve before, right? So you speak one language with them, right? Then it kind of evolved more to, I'll call it regulated industries, right? So people who have sensitive data or they want to do sensitive operations and they're really looking at the security properties. And now they're attracted to some of the properties of confidential computing. And this new epoch we're starting, I think, is, obviously AI has been ramping for a number of years, but with generative AI, I think we're seeing a huge spike there now where people are really realizing that to use the scale of computing that they need, right? They really need cloud, sky computing. And obviously, right, they have really strong concerns about the confidentiality of the operations, of the data. And so that's a completely different conversation now. We're talking to more people that are not familiar with some of these properties, right?
Thank you. And Nelly, in your perspective?
Google is always trying to understand customers very well. And again, we're trying to listen as much as we can and learn from customers. What we hear again and again is that confidential computing, exactly as any other tools that they used in the past, is incredibly important to them, but not in isolation. What customers telling us again and again, that need to connect the dots between how they ingest data, all data, not only sensitive data, to cloud provider, and how to protect it on the wire in such ways that they control it. They also have to have very clear understanding how they would be able to protect data at rest. And the last stage, the last moment, how they will be able to process this data. Because the data that they bring to the clouds in particular is not graveyard. It's not something that's sitting there and again, simply backed up for whatever they need. They need to index it, inference, understand, get some analytics out of that. It's where confidential computing playing incredibly important role. And as Ron said, enable a few use cases that never would be possible to enable before. When companies or organizations or even parts of organizations have to collaborate, securely collaborate and bring all of this data together, it was impossible. So confidential computing is opening this stage, but we need to remember that it's all end-to-end. It's not only confidential computing that we need to address, but also how you secure share keys, how you secure share the attestations, how you would be able to figure out the whole end-to-end story and provide it to the customers. So it's what we hear again and again. Don't focus only on one part of the story. We need to see the whole entire things nailed without any, again, gaps in between.
Very interesting insights, and I think very useful for the audience to hear and to follow the advice. Vishal, you are closer to the sales cycle at EY, and you also talk to users who are not experts in this kind of like technical confidential computing technology. How do you identify when they need confidential computing? How do you explain it to them?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, right? So, like, I think, and maybe I'll give just a financial services as a sector example to your point on sales. I mean, the previous keynote speakers described it very well on what is confidential compute and what are different use cases. But I think when we think about the use cases, when we talk to them, a confidential compute is a great way for at least different financial institutions to really collaborate in terms of sharing data, which typically would be difficult in the regulatory regime that they stay in today to share without addressing concerns on data privacy. And as you know, banking is all about trust, right? I mean, if people run for your money, a Silicon Valley Bank happens, right? So, and trust is also about perception. So, confidential computing, in my mind, is really critical for every single step of the way when you are doing any step with respect to a data in use, so to speak, or data in general, that this becomes the norm rather than an exception. As we build that trust with the consumer, again, that this is about, for the lack of a better word, protecting your asset, the consumer's asset, which is the biggest asset a bank owns, right? And from that perspective, like when we talk about sharing, so, I know we'll all talk about use cases. Maybe I'll wait for that, but sharing for things like anti-money laundering, where, based on the current interpretation of the regulations, banks are not able to share data amongst each other, right? For certain transactions which are very detailed. And therefore, money launderers take advantage of that and take advantage of blind spot. But confidential compute can really help in eliminating that blind spot, thereby really resulting in, not only kind of catching the bad actors, which could be human traffickers, which could be sex traffickers, but also really detecting illicit money flowing through. And that, is a more great to do use case, but there are use cases which have high ROI, or return on investment, like fraud detection as an example, which could be using the same concept, but now really preventing fraud. If you think about credit bureaus, like they are nothing but collecting data from financial institutions, selling it back to them. So, confidential computing can really enable bureaus to the next level, or could enable financial institutions to directly share data with each other. And lastly, I would say, when we talk to our, clients about trust, I mean, people talk about cloud and how cloud computing is so powerful. If you look at the financial services industry, depending on which survey you look at, less than a quarter of financial services data is on cloud. And the question is why? And the answer mostly is trust. That can PII be placed on cloud, because that's the bank's biggest asset provided by a consumer. And it's things like confidential computing, which can be the foundation for enabling that trust for FIs to really start using the cloud to its full, kind of potential. So I would say that's where I'll stop. That confidential computing, to the way we explain to our clients, is the mechanism to create trust and to execute trust, so that they can really leverage the best data possible.
That's a great way to put it. And speaking of anti-money laundering as a use case, that's a great segue in my next question about use cases. So, Ron, I'll start with you.
Yeah.
As being part of the CCC, having the global, more global view, and where do you see the use case demand? Where do you see most use cases right now in this stage? What markets are moving faster versus slower? Yeah, where do you see the use case demand?
I think many of the ones that we've already discussed this morning, you see, and I've kind of referred to in that sort of epic analogy before, right? We can call them regulated industries, right? Healthcare, financial services, government, right? Education even, right? Sometimes it's self-regulation and sometimes it's real regulation, government regulation, right? But obviously, you look at all the use cases that are published, that are out there today. We have folks from Beekeeper here and other places, right? That's all driven by that, either self-regulation or real regulation. But I think we're moving, right? We're spanning that gap into general purpose because AI is addressing everything, right? And the conversation has to start changing to, in terms of what Vishal was saying too. You talk to them in terms of trust, or what I would say, going back to the attestation component of confidential computing, it's about being able to verify that what is running in this environment that you don't have physical control over yourself, right, is what it's supposed to be, right? Whatever you put in there, it's measured, you understand exactly what it is, and you can believe in that, or you can trust in that.
Mm-hmm. So both you and Vishal mentioned regulated industries, and there are also those financial services, healthcare, there are also those industries that move slower.
Yeah.
Any thoughts or insights on how to accelerate their adoption and make them move a little bit faster?
Can I offer
Absolutely.
a few points of hope here? And I think the situation is actually developing very fast. And it's not only about regulation, but it's counter-regulation, and it's related to sovereignty. So when we're talking about sovereignty, and specifically those countries that establishing and working on different sovereignties law, we see more and more demand on this technology, on confidential computing or encryption or trust in general, because those sovereignty law trying to establish boundary on what is possible and not possible to share. And because we're all super interconnected, it's becoming more and more difficult. And this technology, this capability is actually helping to establish this trust, to interconnect, specifically for data sovereignty. And again, for some of you that was watching what is happening in sovereignty world, multiple, again, providers and cloud providers entering with their solutions in this space. And again, confidential computing is a very important part of this solution. So sovereignty, I think, it's really what expedites the need. Sovereignty and ChatGPT will definitely expedite the need of data protection, again, isolation, stronger isolation, better attestation, and all of these capabilities that we're talking about here.
Great. Yeah. So following up on this insight, concretely, which areas you see use case demand and users and just demand for this technology? Which areas do you find it, either to be moving faster, you see more demand?
Again, if I will continue.
Yes.
So I think the biggest area or the fastest moving areas that we see from our customers, it's what we call end-to-end encryption. And its ability, as I mentioned earlier, to ensure that all of those stages are very well, again, connected. It's not only confidential computing by itself, but it's establishing the trust and ensures that all of this capability is actually built on very solid grounds. And it is why, again, almost every confidential computing consortium member and companies like Intel and Google and Microsoft and everybody else trying to establish this verified property of their technology and offer them to customers, to regulators, and to even very offensive white hat security experts to verify. Here is a concrete example. Literally at RSA, Intel and Google announced very interesting work that we've done together. we submitted together Intel firmware for their upcoming trusted domain extension capability and Google capability to validate by external security experts. We also used our well-known Project Zero offensive security experts to validate the same thing. And we publish it, it's available in open, the report coming from NCC, very well-known entity of this technology, what capability we found. Some things we found was surprise to both companies. Intel fixed a few very interesting issues, but by the way, how we work together, how we were first time honestly share very sensitive code and being able to validate it together was amazing way to prove, to demonstrate that we really taking seriously customer trust when it's coming to sovereignty, when it's coming to any other use cases.
Yeah, very interesting, and we should all check the NCC report. I think it's a great example that other companies should also reproduce because, as you say, and as you all say, in fact, trust is a very important component of the adoption. And oftentimes, I get this question, both in academia and industries, how can a customer who doesn't really understand your technology have trust in using it? You know, it sounds extremely powerful, and in fact, it sounds like the right solution, but how can they trust it? So, great insight. Thank you. Vishal, besides anti-money laundering, which sounds like an incredible, important and impactful use case in itself, and that would be enough in itself, I'm just wondering whether you see other use cases in your customer space for confidential computing, other needs, other demand for it.
For sure. And I'll cheat a little bit. I'll just answer one comment on the previous one, which is, I think, important.
Please do.
On this CCC, you said, how do we accelerate this, right? I think one thing that we focus a lot is on the technological aspects, but one thing we focus less is on the policy aspects. And I think that becomes a very important factor for the confidential kind of summit or the confidential committee that you guys are forming, etc., in really working with the regulators, working with your clients and educating them. I mean, I know, Vikas is in the audience, like we did so many presentations to is a small chunk of people in Canada alone, but the fact that if you can spend appropriate time, educate the regulators, educate the clients, and then really help them think through how can this be formulated in a way that the clients can actually be enabled to use it, is a huge area of acceleration, which I think is currently lacking, at least from our perspective in the industry. Now answering your question on the use cases side, so I think we talked about a little bit financial services use cases overall. I think the only other thing that I would mention is we are finding, even institutions who may be international in nature and who have different geographical subunits who need to share data, even though it's within the same institution, is also a very powerful use case in addition to AML, fraud, which are more cross-FI use cases, so to speak, right? And we talked about cloud computing as well. I mean, that was just the financial services sector, but I think many people talked about it. There are many other sectors that we are seeing with strong demand. I mean, manufacturing is a huge sector where we are seeing a strong demand coming from, a creator versus a mass-scale producer. How do they really interact when they're sharing IP amongst each other? We are seeing a huge demand in real estate sectors when it's sensor detections, etc. In terms of how do you use that data and how do you figure out how is real estate being used. There's telecommunications where there's a huge demand. I think MC Square also participated in that, where how do cell phone towers share data amongst each other. So no matter what the sector, like the use cases are tremendous, but the foundation is, can you share data while protecting it? And it's everywhere.
Yes, truly. The need for that confidential computing is everywhere. The question is like, which are what's the priority and the very first ones? And Vishal, now I'm going to cheat you back and go back to your previous point on education. I thought it was a very, very interesting and relevant point. In fact, one of the main goals of this conference is also to educate users on this technology. We have a lot of the attendees are users. We also have use case keynote from Signal. We have 6 of the CFP presentations are use cases, but I would love to also hear your thoughts on what else can we do to educate the public, because it's a mind-boggling technology, so powerful, and the users are not experts. So what more can we do as a community, all of us here, to educate the public further and the users further?
Really quick, can I take a
Absolutely.
moment to put a little bit history behind? So when 3 companies were, again, trying to conspire and create confidential computing consortium, we understood very clearly that working in open and working with our customers and, again, giving them opportunity to understand was absolute fundamental goal of this institution. And I can promise you 6 months later, we started what we called customer voice, SIG, and continue to bring more and more customers so they would understand the direction, the goals, and what this organization and everybody else doing. But I 100% agree with you that understanding not only from technical side, but trying to, again, deal with perception. Because, again, as usual, we're talking about trust. We can be as clear in our wonderful implementations and attestations and cryptographic isolations, but nobody understands what we're talking about. This language is fantastic for this room, but go and interview somebody, people completely will lose mind on those words. So we need to go and have, you ask what we can do. Again, CCC and everyone needs to start understanding that the challenge is how to be able to make this technology, surprisingly enough, incredibly easy to use. And it means exactly as everything that's very easy to use, maybe you don't have to explain too much, the value of this technology. It has to be incredibly cost effective. And it means I don't need to pay your development effort or anything else to be able to use it. I will give you one example that you probably know. 10 years ago, 12 years ago, everybody were talking about certificates for HTTPS. Huh?
Yeah.
You remember? Now, who is talking about certificates anymore? Who cares about certificates? 5 or 9? It's only 3 people, 4 people probably in industry still would be able to understand what I'm talking about.
But it's widely used.
Absolutely. But now, if your website doesn't have HTTPS, it's the site that's, again, exception. It's not the rule. And it's exactly what we need to do with technologies that we so love and believe of power of that. We need to make it easy to use, pervasive everywhere, and make sure that it will not cost too much efforts for everybody to implement, take advantage. And it has to have the right TCO. And as we will go through that, and working with policy and regulators to explain the need of that, we would be able to accomplish what we want. It will become ubiquitous. It will become HTTPS of tomorrow. And that's exactly what we're trying to accomplish.
Ron, any thoughts on
maybe going back to the conversations with customers too, right? Often, not in all cases, but often what works for me, kind of accidentally thinking, right, is in conversations, when you start to explain the complexities of the technologies behind this, right, you kind of lose, right, your audience a little bit, right? But kind of backing off and just talking to them about what they are implicitly trusting today and not being able to verify that, right? It's that realization, I think, when you see, the light bulb over the head, right, that, oh, I didn't really realize, right, what I'm doing already, right, and what the risks are of that, right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
One additional example before we move. It's very, very important topic for all of us. So are you familiar with second factor, MFA? You all. Fantastic. So here's a very interesting example. Everybody understands how important second factor or third factor or as many factors you can do for people's passwords to protect their identity. It was one of the blackheads that completely blew my mind. Actually, somebody on the stage asked everybody in the room, black hat, how many admins do you think using MFA? And everybody started to throw up number 50%, 60%, you imagine, admins. And the guy on the stage said, no, 7%.
Ideal.
And it was paused in the room. And the reason why, because it's complicated. It's not because nobody understands how important to protect your credentials, but it's complicated. So it's again and again and again. As soon as we are not focusing on ease of use and all of these things, I think there will be no chance for us to accomplish what we're trying to do.
Thank you. So as the panel is coming to an end, I'd like to pose this question, and any one of you feel free to volunteer to answer it or not, is what keeps you up at night with regards to confidential computing? What worries do you have? What keeps you up at night?
Maybe I'll go first, right? I'm not the CISO or CIO, right? So I don't really stay up late at night, right? Think about this thing, right? But what I do think about a lot is how do you actually communicate, right? These values, right? These principles in a way that makes sense to different audiences. There's not one message that everybody gets, right? There are different audiences, and I'm always thinking about new analogies, something that, and sometimes you're surprised, right? What it is that actually clicks for somebody, right? So it's different things, right? But maybe in time, right? Just like with MFA or certificates, right? It'll just become natural because really that's what we're seeing. It's a very different paradigm shift, right? From this 50, 60-year-old kind of hierarchical model of computer security that we've had, right? To one that's saying you don't have to trust everything in the environment. You just have to trust the underlying hardware and your workload.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I think in my mind, the things that keeping me wondering, I don't think it's not that I don't sleep at night because of that, is maybe we're positioning this specific technology as very narrow, again, applicability by ourselves. And what I'm trying to say, talking to quite a few customers, when we're saying, okay, take your sensitive data and protect it with confidential computing, customers looking at me very puzzled and saying, okay, how I will figure out that my data is sensitive. All my data is sensitive. There is no way I would be able to, again, protect my sensitive data and leave my non-sensitive data behind. Maybe as an industry, as, again, a confidential computing fan, we need to start thinking about slightly broader picture. Yeah. That this technology is not for sensitive data, not for specific to use cases and multi-party computation type of deal. It's for everything. Because data has very many aspects. One person quoted to me, if my president location yesterday was absolutely critical, sensitive information, tomorrow, all country knows where my president is located. So in this case, the data actually has even temporal aspect in that. So how we want to expect customers to start separating sensitive and not sensitive. So my things and the things that we're trying to think about and asking your help is, maybe we need to stop positioning confidential computing as a technology for sensitive data, sensitive application, and PII. Maybe we need to start thinking about this technology as a way to protect all data, all applications, everywhere. Mm-hmm.
I strongly agree with that. Well said. No,
and on that,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, Vishal.
No, I was just going to say that I totally strongly agree with that. And I think that's starting to come. But to Raluca's earlier point, we have to make sure that everybody, including the regulators, agree with that stance, which again comes through education and knowledge, right? So, but yeah, I'm sorry, I just want to say I totally agree with that.
Thank you. And on that note, that's a very positive and wonderful way to end our panel. So thank you very much to the panelists.
Thank you.